He is a board-certified specialist in virology, microbiology, and molecular biology. And before joining the university, he spent a decade as a public health microbiologist and molecular epidemiologist with the Texas Department of State Health Services. Quite a career. I also want to say that Dr. Rohde is around campus, both here at Round Rock and down in San Marcos, just almost everywhere, always affirming, always positive, always encouraging students and faculty and administrators. He's a person who helps us to be our best, who puts the spotlight on other people. He helps us to shine. We in the College of Education are also very proud of Dr. Rohde because he earned one of his several degrees, his doctoral degree in adult professional and community education from the College of Education. And we always think of you as an honorary faculty member in our college also, and delighted for the difference that you've made for your doctoral program and for all of us across the university. I just can't think of a more affirming and supportive person. And so it's really a delight to be here tonight and to hear your presentation. I'll pass the mic over to you. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean O'Malley. And let me echo Dean O'Malley's thanks to Dr. Hewling and your staff, the Round Rock campus, and everybody for helping put this together tonight. I am excited to be with you tonight, both here and out in Zoom world. And as the title mentions, I'm going to be speaking to you tonight about, I think, some careers and majors at college levels across the spectrum. So, disclaimer, I am not an expert in every healthcare career. I am a medical laboratory scientist and an infectious disease public health person, but in my 30-year career, I've crossed paths with many of these types of majors. I'm also an adjunct professor at Austin Community College, my 27th year, which is hard to believe. And I teach in that kind of area, allied health and some of those courses. So I welcome any ACC students and others that might be in Zoom tonight listening. Some of my students may be listening in, or former students. The other disclaimer is that I will be talking about 10 or 12 majors tonight, and there are many unheard, kind of hidden majors out there. So one of the things I typically tell people when I get to talking about career paths is that part of this, is kind of a 50-50 thing. So if you're a high school student out there, or you have children that are high school students or junior high students or early college, one of the things is to be nosy. You really need to be a nosy student. And what I mean by that is that it's incumbent on you, as well as professors and teachers and counselors and other people in your life, to dig in, right? And that means to go online. It certainly means to do some networking with professionals and with your professors and teachers, because many times we may not offer this information. We just may think you know it. And so that's part of my goal, especially in the latter part of my career. I've been really passionate about trying to get people connected to careers that they're really interested in. And so having said that, we will see if I can get this slide to advance. Hang on one moment. We checked this earlier, but it just seemed to stop working. Thank you, sir. Okay. So again, I kind of just mentioned this, and it was part of the conversation in my introduction, but it goes without saying that, during probably the biggest global health emergency in the past century that we are hopefully on the downside of in this coming year, healthcare has more than ever before, rose to the forefront, along with public health as well. And with that comes opportunity. And so again, students, parents of students, teachers and faculty should keep that in mind as they're talking to young people and non-traditional students, because there are so many career paths in healthcare to think about. And I'm going to throw public health in there a little bit as well, because that's part of my background. And so what I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight are careers that are really, really, really visible and public facing. So physicians, nurses, I love them all, a physical therapist, veterinarians, even pharmacists. Typically, most people know what those individuals are and do for their career paths. I'm going to talk about what I think are more hidden. And I'm going to start off with some that are in our very own College of Health Professions at Texas State. And then I'll let you know when we kind of move into an area that is not offered by Texas State. The other piece I'll mention as I get started is that this crosses the spectrum of associate degrees, bachelor's degrees primarily, but occasionally I'll throw in some higher grad level types of things as we get through with this. So this is our college at Texas State, the College of Health Professions. And we have 8 different programs, and you can see these on the screen here. We have a very well-respected national programs of excellence all over, understood all over the country. We have on-campus practice facilities. So if you know anything about healthcare at all, you know that most student majors are not only taking coursework, but they're also working in clinics in different places around the state and sometimes out of the state, but they're also on campus doing some of that. So here in Round Rock, we have these wonderful centers, the Texas State Sleep Center, the Physical Therapy Clinic, a Speech Language Hearing Clinic. There's also that in the San Marcos area. And we have a lot of state-of-the-art types of laboratories and other features that you would expect in a university like Texas State. And I know all the faculty there that are in the room with me, as well as others, have nothing but praise for our advising center. They are a fantastic group of people, as they are across the university here at Texas State. So here it is in a breakdown. We have about 120 faculty at Texas State in the College of Health Professions. In our college, we have roughly 3,000 undergrad students, some other post-bac and graduate students, 4 departments, 2 programs, 2 schools. So that's the 8 different programs, different levels of degrees and other types of programs. And you can see listed on the screen, we're moving quickly to become more Round Rock focused. Most of the programs now in our college are here. As you can see, we started with the St. David School of Nursing. That was the first school in our college that came here. They actually were here. They were established here. The rest have been moving here over the past 6, 7, 8 years. My program, Clinical Laboratory Science, Healthcare Administration, will be next in line. As you can see on the screen, we're still on the San Marcos main campus, and we're excited about that occurring in the next 2 to 3 years. Hopefully, we'll be up here with the rest of our colleagues. Generally, and again, for the audience on Zoom especially, who I know may not know about this, most of our programs in the College of Health Professions and around the country for that matter, many are what we call 2+2. So if you're a high school student or a junior high student or a community college student, this might be something you think about when you're doing your research online or you're talking to people. 2+2 is pretty simple. The first 2 years are your typical undergraduate general education classes, your English, your history, your political science, your basic math, things like that. The second 2 years are when you are actively in the major. And I'll talk about how that happens in a second, but that's when you are in your core coursework for example, medical laboratory science. You're doing advanced level work. That's really all you're doing. Lots of clinical involvement, lots of didactic and lectures and labs and other things on campus, but you've got a mixture of experiences. Across all of the units in our college, including the graduate programs, typically looking at some pretty selective admission processes. So it's a very limited enrollment for most majors. And again, speaking again to those out on Zoom world, what that means, and I often do this at Bobcat Day for the university, is that means when you were in high school and junior high, and you're building towards what you think might be a healthcare career, regardless of what major you're thinking about, you really want to be focused and start thinking about grades, which is, I know, hard to do sometimes when you're 16, 17, 18, and 14, but you do, because when you get to college and you move through your college first 2 years, you also want to continue to do well because GPA matters. It really does for the healthcare majors. And I'll share that in a minute with some background information. All of our programs require criminal background checks. Also something, again, that the people in the room know, but again, speaking to everyone out there, this is important to understand as a young person or even a non-traditional student. because this is healthcare world. You really have to have a relatively clean record, so to speak, to get into these types of programs and to work in the healthcare area. So even if somehow you slip through the cracks, it might be a problem later in your actual employment process. So it's something to be very wary of and aware of, even as an undergrad, that you're kind of staying out of trouble, right? Because it can really impact your life as far as your career. We all meet accreditation and national standards. I already mentioned we're just programs of excellence across the college. And every program, as you can see at the bottom here, has profiles on our primary website with all sorts of great information that I'm not going to go into. So let me get into the meat of the talk and move along a little bit tonight. So the first one I'm going to talk about, the most important career path ever, my very own. This is what you get to do when you're the speaker, is highlight your major. And it really is an important career path. And I'm just saying that jokingly. They're all great paths. This is called clinical laboratory science, also known, it's really moving to medical laboratory science is kind of the national term, because that is the credential. When you pass the actual certification or license, when you practice, you're a medical laboratory scientist. So that CLS, clinical lab science, is kind of going away. We are accredited. When you go through our program, and this is generally most 2+2 programs, graduation, I always tell our students, graduation is goal number one. Graduation, a wonderful event in your life. But 1A for us is you have to pass an external licensing or certification exam, which is outside of Texas State's hands or any university, and you need it to work. So there is a bit of pressure on students in our programs to think about that. But every program I know I can speak about in our university and my colleagues around the country prepare you for that exam. But you do have, skin in the game. You have to make sure you're learning and reviewing all the way through. For us, again, this selective admissions piece. So for us, we can only take 20 students a year. Clinical programs are like this because keep in mind, we are doing work and clinicals and internships in the clinical setting. And typically that's our limitation, at least it is for us. In other words, hospitals can't take 150 students from Texas State CLS program in this area because they just can't. There's just not enough people to get them in, places to do it, and so forth. So it really becomes problematic. That's a bottleneck for many programs in healthcare. All your prereqs for us are biology, chemistry, and all the usual things in your first 2 years. Again, we have wonderful laboratories on the San Marcos campus, and when we get up here, we'll have even newer and better. And we do have graduates. Primarily, 80% of our students work in hospitals in the medical laboratory, but we have a smattering of others that work in public health, in veterinary areas, and research labs, and so forth. So there are other places they can work. Here's a snapshot of our program, and you'll see several of these tonight, and I won't read this to you, but you can see, if you quickly look, we have anywhere from 30 to 50 applications per year, and we only take 20. So sometimes, that's something I'll mention to people when they're a freshman or sophomore, to think about that, because you can see our average. We look at both science GPA and kind of the overall prereq GPA, and you can see we're primarily in the mid threes or under the mid threes, and that's pretty typical for many of our programs. So we conduct all medical lab tests. So again, if you're out there listening, you've heard a lot about PCR testing and rapid antigen testing and things like that in the last 2 years. That's just a small piece of the pie. So the pandemic has actually helped, in a weird sense, shine a light on our profession and our major. But we conduct actually 13 billion tests a year, everything you can think of. And this sounds bizarre, but I always tell students this: anything and everything that can come out of a human body, we're testing it. Anything, right? So that's our world across all spectrums. The data we provide, about 2/3 of all the life-saving data to physicians and other professionals, really from birth to death. And it's the single highest volume medical activity affecting Americans. So if you're looking at the US. So pretty important stuff. These are the areas. So some of these words you may or may not know, but Immunohematology, I've thrown in the kind of the jargon, that's the blood bank. That's a kind of a specialized word for blood bank. So I tell students, we have a really rigorous 4-year degree because our guys are actually majoring in 4 or 5 areas. For example, when I did my bachelor's degree, I didn't know about this major. I majored completely in microbiology. That was it. So that's my kind of specialty area, and I've got those specialist credentials, but our guys are generalists. They have to know all this stuff, and it's intense and it's broad and it's awesome, but it does test our students. This piece here is also really important. I've spoken a lot about this during the pandemic because testing is so critical for quality control and quality assurance. Sometimes we got a little leery during the pandemic because testing was popping up everywhere. And, you really want to be careful with, pop-up testing. They really shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. It's more of a licensed or certified type of event. Just some pictures of our students and professors. This is on the San Marcos, again, on the campus doing different things. From the front end, we learn phlebotomy all the way through the testing cycle and also all the resulting and validating of results. So it's not just running the equipment in the test, it's the whole global picture of testing from specimen collection to acquisition of the data and the result for the physicians and others. Radiation therapy, I think people know about this in the sense that they know what cancer is, certainly, but I'm not always sure they know about radiation therapy majors as much as they might nursing and others. So I'm going to mention this one also tonight. It's at our college in Texas State. This is one of the more recent programs that has moved to Round Rock. It's a bachelor's degree in radiation therapy, again, all accredited. This is about a 2.5-year program that begins in the junior year, just like ours, so a 2+2. Notice the number of students are only 16 a year, so pretty small program. I think they get 30 or so applications a year. And again, pretty intensive. Patient care. They're dealing with cancer patients. They're learning how to treat cancer patients with certain high beam radiation and things like that. So it's a pretty specific and specified field. And when they graduate, they also take a certification to become certified radiation therapist. And there's their snapshot. So around 30, 35 applications a year, and they take around that 16 or so mark. And you can see their GPAs are also very nice, very competitive. Again, that's not I should mention for us too, that does not mean a student that's, a sophomore and making a 2.9 or a 3.0 or a 3.2 should just give up. We look at the whole application. Often some of those students are admitted. It's just we want people aiming for the best as they're coming through those first 2 years of college. Communication disorders, again, this was one I wasn't sure if I would talk about it tonight, but I went ahead and left it in because I didn't really know a lot about this, even as a new professor when I came here. I think the old terminology, and somebody can correct me here if I'm wrong, was speech pathology, all right? So you may have heard of that. Now it's typically referred to as communication disorders. I'm going to kind of focus on the top, but there is a graduate program as well at Texas State. So the bachelor's degree really provides undergraduate students kind of with the holistic background, the academic rigor to get into grad school, because graduate school is kind of the practice level credential that you eventually earn. And so that's kind of what the bachelor's level is about, providing that big, broad knowledge around normal and disordered speech and language, things that I didn't really know when I was a new professor, even swallowing issues, and certainly the hearing process and all that. So it's more than just hearing and speech. It's kind of anything connected to that process. Notice they take quite a few students. They take 60 a year, but it is still selective, and you'll see that in a second. And then once you finish a bachelor's degree, which is kind of something you have to do to get into their graduate programs, is then you typically are going to go get into a graduate program. There's also doctorate levels. We don't have them here at Texas State. Maybe we will one day. But this is the full-time at Texas State face-to-face program, very competitive admission process. So if you're thinking about grad school, this becomes a little more competitive. This is the clinician level. And again, you're going to sit for a state licensure as a speech language pathologist. You can also pick up these certificates of clinical competence around other areas. This is 40 per year. So they take fewer students in grad school. The bottom parts, if you've seen, I haven't mentioned them, but these are kind of the highlights that our faculty often talk about at Bobcat Day with respect to our different programs. I will mention, which again, I think I learned this when I came here, their graduate program actually offers areas in autism, kind of understanding that and dealing with that type of situation, fluency, all of these other kind of neurogenic areas and other things, which is really interesting. Bilingual. I mean, I never really thought about that, you know, as a professional. Bilingual speech pathology, how to kind of deal with that type of circumstance. So interesting area. And there again, you can see the snapshot. Again, this is looking at bachelor's level. This is not the graduate level. And you can see they're approaching kind of 60-ish people, and depending on the year, they may get different numbers coming in. High GPAs. I know for their graduate program, and Dr. Marshall's in the crowd here, they get hundreds of students, right? And they take those 40 people. So really, really competitive at the graduate level. I have some HIM faculty also in the audience today. So this is the Bachelor's of Science in Health Information Management. And again, they actually have the one of only 3 HIM bachelor degrees in Texas. And they also have the only HIM master's program in Texas, which is relatively a new program. But at the bachelor's level, again, fully accredited, nationally accredited, and a program of excellence. When they finish their bachelor's degree, they can sit for this RHIA examination for their credential. They have professional practice experiences throughout their 2 years in the program, all sorts of settings, all sorts of facilities. Think about, I think the focus here I might mention, and you might realize, health information management, it's all about informatics. It's all about information, patient data, much of it protected. And so these majors are really getting hit with that type of experience. The electronic health record, the EHR, if you've heard of that during the pandemic, is part of this world. And it's really part of all of our world. If you've ever been a patient, that information is shared across the healthcare spectrum. And so it has to be secure. It has to be accurate. It has to be able sometimes to be read across different spectrums. So it's a really critical area. You can see they take in residence cohort of 25, and they also have a fully online bachelor's with 25. That's correct, Dr. Gribbs? And then the master's program, again, excellent program, fully online, 25 a year. Right? And I would assume if you have that bachelor's degree, you're going to be very competitive for that graduate plan as well. Here's a snapshot of their program here. And again, you can see going from, again, all of these are at about a 5-year span and quite a few applications. Also one of the newer programs, by the way, to come to Round Rock recently. So they're here on the Round Rock campus now, and strong GPAs as well. So again, a College of Health Professions program. And again, all of these, with the exception of nursing, were established in San Marcos historically, and most of these are being moved into Round Rock now. Now, respiratory care, Dr. Marshall, our chair of respiratory care, is here in the audience. I will say that, like the lab, I think the pandemic really blew up the awareness of this profession, I think. I mean, everybody I talked to, especially in the early days, you know, we're talking about pneumonia, intubation, ventilation, and many people think that is a physician's job or a nurse's job. And while they may be there assisting or doing different things, it is a respiratory licensed therapist that is doing that type of work. So this is a patient-facing, heavy patient involvement type of career. You can see it, this is also in Round Rock as well. And you can see there's kind of a different grouping here of different plans. We've got the bachelor's at the top. And this is a very interesting path because clinical training begins immediately. What year do they start that? In their junior year, but it's immediately. And I should say that because for ours, we don't start until the second senior year. So this is right off the bat. They're out there rounding and doing patient work and so forth. So 2 years of patient care along with in-class lectures and labs and all the usual stuff. A lot of internship specializations, and they accept 44 years, still correct, and fall admission. They also more recently input a kind of associate's degree to bachelor's completion, fully online. And so you have to have that associate degree with certification to be considered. And that is 80 students a semester. And I guess that's a rolling type of admission year round. More recently, the master's program came along with respiratory care. This is a 36-hour online graduate program for typically practicing professionals and respiratory therapists. This is typically completed in 4 semesters. And sometimes in master's programs in healthcare options, you'll have different types of areas that you can kind of pick up your graduate degree in. For us, the option is for leadership or polysomnography, which is sleep, the science of sleep, the healthcare of sleep, and everything around it. Again, something I think I learned when I joined Texas State and became friends with many of the respiratory care faculty, is that sleep is really a component of breathing and your whole respiratory experience. So polysomnography is the big sciencey word for it, but it's all about sleep. They have an awesome facility here, a sleep center. And so people can come in from the community and through physician referrals and other routes through healthcare to be studied for sleep disorders. Again, that's graduate level, 20 people a semester. All of these are accredited. And the program is the largest university-based respiratory care program in the country and one of only 45 bachelor programs in the nation. And there's their snapshot. And I think this is bachelor's level data. I think I grabbed all the bachelor's level data, and you can see they're pretty competitive, sometimes approaching 100 applications, but probably averaging 75 or 80, and they take 44 a year. All above 3 GPAs, and I know very competitive to get into those programs. Healthcare administration, I believe this is the last one I'll talk about with respect to Texas State programs, is sometimes when people ask me about healthcare administration, I'll sometimes mention it, and I may be saying this wrong, but it's kind of the business slanted major for healthcare. So these are individuals that typically are going to be CEOs and COOs and different people of different healthcare facilities. They are certified, so there's a bachelor's level here. You enroll in HA courses in the junior year. That's the BHA. There's a BS in health sciences, which is very new, just started in 19. This has become quite popular. And the goal of this is, and I actually will talk about this a little bit more later with a similar degree path, is the Bachelor of Science in Health Science allows you to kind of fill out different areas of healthcare from the standpoint of different job paths. And I'll talk about that more soon. It's also an open major. So this is not selective admission. And I should also mention, this rarely happens in healthcare majors, but sometimes it does. So say someone was a clinical lab science major in my program and they got to their end of their junior year and they just decided, and they came to me and said, Dr. Rohde, this isn't going to work. It's not what I expected. I can't stand the sight of blood. I mean, anything can happen really to a student that hasn't been in those experiences. And in the past, that was a struggle for us because that might mean, oh man, you spent a year with us, maybe you can change your major to biology, microbiology, chemistry. And that was a route. but they had kind of lost some coursework there, you know, and nobody likes to lose time in a college major. This really helps because the Bachelor's of Science in Health Science will allow you, that coursework will be accepted in that major so you don't lose time. I think a really smart thing that was created here at Texas State to allow that to happen. Master's program, again, this is there's an executive track here option. It's fully online. Again, this is a graduate level degree. Obviously, these are typically practicing professionals, mostly coming back and picking up that kind of high level graduate understanding of that business side of healthcare. And then they have a long-term / nursing home / that type of care certificate, which is 20 students a semester. And there's the snapshot for HA. So again, a little more sporadic. I think 22 has something to do with everything that we've all been experiencing in the last couple of years. But in general, they're looking at close to 80 average of students applying. And again, strong GPAs for these majors. Okay, you get a sip of water. This is a transition. Now we're going to start talking about a handful of things that are not offered at Texas State. Again, disclaimer, I'm not an expert in these areas, but these are things I have colleagues that do, and sometimes even closer, I have former students that are alumni that have moved into some of these tracks. So I'll have that kind of experience as a mentor or former professor. So health services coordination, this is almost what I think is our health science bachelor's in HA. When I looked at this, it's like, this sounds pretty close to what HA is offering, but a few differences in how they kind of talk about it. So if you've earned a certificate, a diploma, or an associate's degree in a healthcare related field, and you're exploring opportunities for advancement. So these might be for people that have an associate's degree, they graduated with a high school diploma and was working in a medical office, they're a medical assistant, and they're kind of searching, right, for things to do. There is this Bachelor of Science Health Services Coordination major that helps you kind of tailor your ongoing it's typically an online degree. Not always. There were a few programs I saw that were in-house, but most are online. And you can see the coursework: healthcare management, care coordination, strategy, leadership. So kind of a broad area. And then there's typically a capstone experience where they're doing something project related or research related or healthcare experience. I put this on the bottom for this one because this holds true for many of our majors. They're all growing like crazy, right? I know for clinical lab science, it's around 14 or 15% for the next 10 years, way ahead of other types of career paths, right? So these are, again, areas of career paths and majors that provide stability and longevity to careers for most people. Here's some possible jobs and possible work settings for health services coordination. And it's not all inclusive. I just grabbed a handful. So patient advocates, right? In my experience even on my doctoral degree, my entire dissertation was looking at people with MRSA, which is an antibiotic resistant infection, and how they adapted and learned. And what we know now, which is kind of common sense, but going out and looking at it and really advocating for it, was many people that are in healthcare don't ask questions. They don't advocate for themselves. You may have family members that are elderly where you've helped take care of them. I'm entering that phase of my life. I'm the go-to healthcare person for my mom and dad. And so you're the advocate, and that can mean anything from, you know, in a sense, being there for them just to get them through a difficult time, but also making sure all the paperwork's correct and the medications are right, and asking questions, right, that they don't want to do. Health services coordinators, patient educators, community health educators, and you can see these could be almost anywhere, including school systems, where you're going in and working with, you know, a health program at, say, a high school or something like that. So these are really about, as the bottom says, kind of helping patients navigate, including their families, the complexities of our healthcare system. And every time I sit down to fill out another insurance form or go online to do something to help my parents, you know, I appreciate people that can help me. And typically it's someone in this area. Here's one a little more, I've had students, clinical lab science, medical lab science majors that are doing this now. It is a very competitive area, but it's very interesting if you're into this stuff. So this is called a cardiac perfusionist. And these are people that basically become experts in heart surgery. That's really their wheelhouse. That's all they do. Most people probably would have never heard about this. They might even think that this is taken care of by a nurse or something like that, but these are a little different. They are certified clinical perfusionists or CCPs. They operate that heart-lung machine, if you've ever heard of that or seen it on television or something like that. And that takes the place of the heart during life-changing operations. So your blood and all these things are kind of routed through a machine to help it be oxygenated and other things so that you can be operated on in a sense and set your heart on standby, if you will. So it performs all those functions that a normal human heart would. They play a critical role in many surgeries, obviously involving the heart, organ transplants, bypasses, and other types of cardiac operations. So you might think that this is kind of a higher level, and you probably are correct. Usually, these are people that might already have a related degree in healthcare. For instance, medical lab science is an area that this typically works for. I'm assuming nursing might do something like this, or maybe respiratory care, patient-facing, but also sometimes laboratory people that want to become involved in this type of really well-defined area. And so they typically are going to undertake an accredited training program in this clinical cardiac perfusion to gain these particular skill sets. Generally, this is kind of a broad statement because it was kind of looking at multiple programs, but generally they're talking about at least 150 procedures, obviously under supervision as a trainee, before you take a certification exam through the American Board of Cardiovascular Perfusion. Once you do all of that, you become a cardiac perfusionist, right? There's about 18 schools that I found that offer these programs at all levels, certificate, bachelor's, and master's, and that probably aligns with experience, your past education, and those sorts of things. So this is a mannequin doing some simulation type here thing here in the picture, and just giving you some information about salary here. So typically entry level between 60 and 75K, and that might be a question from the audience later that I think I can answer across some of these majors, but maybe not all, with respect to salary. That's typically easy to find if you look it up under the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. It changes regionally and geographically for many of these majors, depending on where you live. So if you're looking at salaries, always keep in mind that Austin, Texas might be different than West Texas. New York City obviously will be different than a small rural town, right? It just is because of cost of living. As you get experience, and you might pick up specialist skill sets and things like that, you can start approaching six figures. And again, some of this data is a little dated, so I wouldn't be surprised if you know they're approaching six figures, especially as they get into their career. And there are manager status and supervisor status that always help raise that salary. We all love librarians, I hope. I know in my career as a faculty member and as a student, these are individuals that can really make a difference in your life. And it might not be something you're thinking about as a healthcare area, but it is. There are specializations in medical librarians. They never, as the statement says, they're never going to pick up a scalpel or do a lab test, but they're very key in certain interactions of information. They help all of us across all levels of healthcare around new developments, specialty medical areas, working with patients and other members of the public to kind of think about what health information should I trust? More important than ever right now, right? all kinds of information out there for us to look at as consumers of information. It's hard enough for healthcare people to stay on top of things, much less the general public. So sometimes I'll even mention this to my friends and family. There are medical librarians. You can actually talk to experts in healthcare that are typically more up to date than maybe I am on particular areas of the literature. And that's what they do. They work in a wide range of environments, especially colleges, universities, and other, big hospitals, health science centers, foundations, even pharmaceutical firms and insurance companies where medical information is so critical, government agencies for sure. Grab this off the Bureau of Labor and Statistics as well. It kind of depends again on where you're living and your level of responsibility and length of employment and so forth. But you can see, you might start out, around 50K, move into the 60s when you start getting experience. And then if you move into director positions, depending on where you're at, they can reach six figures plus. And there is a medical library association where you can gain a certification as a medical librarian. Echocardiographer, again, I think is kind of an interesting path. Now this again is a specialized area in medicine. And so sometimes this is known as a cardiac sonographer or cardiac ultrasound technologist. And they typically operate specialized equipment, generally just kind of explaining it. Again, I'm not an expert in this area, but they use sound waves and other ways to create and transmit images of the heart, especially, but probably other organs nearby. Also, obviously, you can use ultrasound for that type of information. And they have a variety of educational backgrounds. They have a 2-year associate's degree program. Others will compute some of the few bachelor's degree programs that are available in the US. So these are more associate and bachelor level programs. You also do the typical on-the-job / clinical internships or clinical areas where you're going out and doing those experiences. They tend to be professionals that are already working in other related healthcare areas. Generally, they don't have to be, but they may be. I'm not sure if this is an up-to-date photo or not. I may be dating myself. That looks a little dated, but sometimes in my experience, it's interesting. When I was at the CDC, for example, you might think that places have state-of-the-art stuff, but they might actually be catching up at times because of where you're at, especially in government agencies. But anyway, again, sitting there, and you might think of pregnancy or something like this with an ultrasound. So, I mean, this is a variety of uses where people can use this, and certainly other professionals can do this, including physicians and things like that, to kind of look at this type of data. Again, when I talk to parents, some traditional college students, when I talk to parents at Bobcat Day or elsewhere when I'm traveling or doing talks, one of the things that they always light up about is it's all of these. If I didn't mention it, I'll mention it again. They're very particular. You have a certain certification or license. You are not competing with 300 million people in America. You basically have a guaranteed route and a track and a decent salary, typically starting out. Typically, I think all of us in the room and out there that know about these programs, you have jobs lined up before you graduate. If I didn't mention that, it is a known thing, at least in my world, and I'm sure elsewhere. I know nursing and other places. I'll often tell parents, if your son or daughter is not working after they graduate, it's because they're taking a break and they don't want to work, because people need you in healthcare. Here's the echocardiography as far as salary goes. So 62K median. You can see this one kind of broke it out, which was kind of interesting. Some of these areas you do get paid by the hour. And so this kind of breaks it out depending on what part of the country you live in. So that median's around $32 an hour, which equates to roughly 60K a year. The other thing I'll mention, which I should, especially to the online audience, many of these career paths and jobs, you can earn more. This is kind of a hidden thing sometimes to people that don't know about it, by working second shift or third shift. That's called a differential. So my students that work night shift make more money than the daytime shift. It's just the way it is because of those requirements and that stress of working all night. Holidays, weekends sometimes might be something as well that you get a little bit more bump to your hourly wage or what have you. So that's really kind of cool. The other, I think, interesting thing about some of these, even in my field, you have kind of some flexibility depending on where you're at. So medical lab scientists, for example, can be a PRN. They can work part-time. Many hospitals want those individuals. They just want somebody for weekends or whenever. And so you can play that out in your brain as a young person or a non-traditional person. You're a mom, you're your new mom, and you need to stay home for a while because that's what you want to do. But you might be able to go in and do like a weekend or something. You don't just completely stop. You step out a little bit, but you're still engaged with your career. And then you go back full on later, or school or whatever. I mean, you could be working on a master's or a doctorate degree and earning a living, at least part-time, in one of these career paths. You could really still be helping contribute to the income of your family or your household. Cytotechnologists. Cytotechnologists are indispensable really in these hospital and clinical settings. These are really more related to my background, laboratory professionals. And so this is all about cells and cellular biology. And they're really looking at those samples and really trained to notice really finite changes in certain types of cells, precancerous, malignant, infectious conditions. They work really closely with pathology. And so, a lot of microscopy, a lot of high-level imaging, and even some genetics, where you're looking at some genetics around cellular processes. And typically, this is a bachelor's degree. You could have it in many fields, including medical lab scientists. And then typically, you're going to go through some combination of education and on-the-job training. And many employers really want you to be certified by a professional organization, and this one has one. That's across the board. And again, starting salary is pretty good in the 50s and 60s. That's a slide of some red blood cells and other types of things that even my majors look at to determine different issues. Another interesting one as I get close to the end here is nuclear medicine technologist. These are individuals that prepare and administer radiopharmaceuticals, so radioactive types of things you might receive, testing for and treating diseases through radiation, processing studies and recording results. And they kind of monitor the patients, but they're also dealing with mixing of different chemicals that might be going into you. Nuclear medicine kind of meaning that. They typically work in hospitals. Sometimes they'll be in specialized imaging clinics and other labs. Associates, bachelors do exist, but typically this is an associate's level type of degree and licensure in certain states. I should say on some of these, when you see that usually licensure or usually certification, you really want to check the state you live in for these because it depends. I won't read these to you on the second bullet, but another important thing to think about if you're out there listening, understand the job titles. They are across the spectrum, even in my field, medical lab, clinical lab. They kind of are the same thing. And just a quick cartoon. So these guys earn around 75, 76K. Not bad for a 2-year degree, right? I mean, that's a pretty nice starting salary in healthcare, even if it's plus or minus a few thousand. Autopsy technicians, medical examiner technicians. These are what you think they are. They assist medical examiners and coroners. Those individuals are physician level professionals. So you're working with them, toxicology, examining biopsies and tissue, both living and post-mortem, dead people, and performing those things to try to understand the cause of death and working with that death certification. So kind of a different area, but many people are interested in forensics and medical examining. Bachelor's degree in biology forensics are related. Some entry-level roles may allow for an associate degree with on-the-job training, but most states require licensing around that. So again, you want to check with your state. And this one's growing rapidly, 16 to 20% in the next 10 years. And there's again a cartoon. So crime scene, so some people think about crime scene. I will tell you, just a quick side note, Many college students coming in when they talk to me think they're going to be a forensic scientist, AKA television. That is not typically what's going on. A crime scene person is often, believe it or not, a high school level person or associate's degree, and they're going in with police and others, all kinds of people, and collecting data, collecting it correctly, information and scene evidence, logging it correctly, bringing it back. They are not the physician level, understanding everything in the laboratories. That's a different degree path, typically a clinical chemist with a PhD. So you really need to know that going in because that's a totally different area. I think respiratory care has a faculty member that's kind of specialized in this area, organ and tissue procurement. So I'm not sure if that was acquired in a different way. So I'm not sure how that faculty member did it. This is at the level of a technician. They work to harvest organs and tissues in patients who have died as organ donors. So there's some specialized training there, obviously, in aseptic recovery, communication, and all those things that go around that, and transporting those to be used. Again, obviously a hospital-related type of career path. Diploma, certificate, or associate degree, and obviously others can pick this up that are PhD level or other graduate level types of individuals. And they do have a national board for surgical technology if you're interested in these types of career paths, including surgical technology, which is coming up in a second. So surgical technologist, I know ACC has a program in this because I get a lot of students interested in this. These are individuals that work to prepare the operating room, sterilize equipment, make really important jobs. As an infectious disease person, you want sterility in anything that's going into the human body in surgery. So these are the individuals that do that. Again, a really great associate's degree level type of position. I promise this is my last one, as we're running a little over here. IPs, again, this is near and dear to my heart. I have former students that have ventured into this world. I think if I was 20 years younger, I might look at this area as another specialization. Sometimes, a lot of times nurses and physicians do this, but so do medical lab professionals and others. And these are specialists in infection prevention. So they have to understand microbiology, all the pathogens, and how things are helping and with respect to hospital epidemiology. Is there an outbreak in the hospital? So it becomes really problematic if you have antibiotic resistance in those areas. Certification through APIC, a high level certification, very difficult to get, pretty rigorous. I've looked at that information because I have former students doing it. These are the types of things you might do if you're an IP, public health background, medical lab background, a nurse, physicians can be IPs. You go sit and get clinical experience and sit for an exam to get this certification. They're typically higher level, already working in the field. And you're basically a detective. You're a hospital epidemiologist, but you're also in charge of everything from health care for hand hygiene to cleaning to surveillance of the environment of different microbes. And so it's really an interesting area if you like microbiology and infection prevention. Nice pay ranges. Again, some of my former students are in the six-figure area, working up in Philadelphia and elsewhere in these areas, doing some really exciting stuff. So I promised I'm almost done here. Just a quick look at some of our facilities here in Round Rock. This is showing off our nursing building. If you're in Round Rock or the surrounding communities, I know at different times they have events for you to come by and visit. I'm sure if you call the different offices and talk to the different chairs and directors, there might be a way to get a hold of some of that information, as well as websites. One of our also newer facilities here, this is Willow Hall. This is physical therapy, respiratory care, communication disorders at the moment. And so look at these beautiful facilities. This is right outside the doors here. With Seton Hospital in the background. And as I mentioned, we, Clinical Lab Healthcare Administration, we're still in San Marcos. There's our building, soon to be moving up in the next, I think, 2 to 3 years as we get that building going. So as I wrap up, I'll just leave you with a slide here on our main website for advising. Again, please check it out online and talk to people, as I mentioned earlier, as you're going forward. I'm going to give a shout out here to my second gig that I'm in my 27th year. And I just love teaching at ACC because it's a totally different experience. Wonderful colleagues there. Many I've worked with for 20 plus years now. And look at their program offering here. So, a great, ACC has this saying, we are ACC and start here to get there. And so we accept ACC students all the time into our programs. I know the nursing has, that collaboration, different places have that collaboration. And even there's even an MLT program here that's kind of the associate's level of my profession. Really important jobs here. I'll stop there. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry I ran over a little bit, not too much. And I am happy to answer any questions if that's coming from online or from the audience, or if you have expertise and want to correct me in some of these areas, please do. Thank you. So if you're online, the chat, I think, is activated, and
I will say one thing while people are having time to put their questions together. If you want, and this is true for the online too, there was a barcode that you could scan, and then we will send you a certificate that documents that you spent the hour with us and doing this. So some people like it to have just documentation for the extra things they've done.
yeah.
Like all of your presentation, I could keep us here till 10 o'clock at night with all of my questions because I just find, your information so helpful and all. Are there any questions coming? No, so far. Okay.
Lots of experts out there.
I'll ask one question. I promise I'll stop. But and this would be kind of my parent hat.
Okay.
I had a student, a child, that say wanted a specific program, such, I'll just use radiation therapy as an example, and they were going to die if they didn't get into this program. Would you recommend that they apply to multiple universities? So that was, I think, my big question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that question. That's a reminder, something I kind of think about and tell students all the time, even our program. So, and I think most of us do this. And as a chair, and faculty, but I'm definitely talking to most applicants often.
Right.
And so absolutely, you should not put all your eggs into one basket. We want you to be a Bobcat,
Of course.
an ACC student, if that's where you're thinking. We want you to be there, but certainly due to the selective admission, that's part of the bottleneck, and the numbers of majors interested, you want to spread out your eggs a little bit. So the good news is there are programs around Texas and out of state, but there are many in Texas. We have about 13 MLS programs in Texas, which is actually one of the big state, more programs. So yes. And the other thing I'll mention that you triggered my memory is I'm a father of two. They're out of school. Thank you, Jesus. I got a pay raise recently. And, one of the things I used to talk to them about with that hat on as a dad, but also as a professor, is it's competitive and it's not the end of the world. Right. So one of the things I tell students that I talk to every day at Texas State is, even if you didn't get into my program, there are things to think about. You can apply to different programs. If you're passionate about it, take a year. Maybe it was a grade issue or something like that. Take a year and go back and repeat some courses and make A's and B's instead of all C's.
Right.
That's really just kind of practical advice. Likewise, you might look at something else, or you might pick many of my guys, and I know some of you out in the audience have this. I was one of these people. You might finish a bachelor's degree in microbiology or chemistry. You can come back to my program as a post-bac student, and you're typically more competitive. You've completed a degree. You have that proof that you can get through a college degree.
Right.
You've kind of gotten it together, maybe grade-wise, and more mature and all those good things. So there are routes into these majors at any time in your life. It might not be when you're 20. It might
Right.
be 24,
Yeah.
22.
Great. So any questions from anyone here? I know we are running. Did any questions come in, Edgar? Okay. All right. Well, I really want to thank Dr. Rohde for another great presentation. We so appreciate it. It's been a real joy to collaborate more with health sciences this year than at least College of Education has done in the past. And so we're really looking forward to continuing that. So thank you again. And thank you all for being here. And for the online people, we really are happy that you joined us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks,
Uh-huh.
everybody.
Nice shout out to the